Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. It is the Rebound series. My name is Farai Mwakutuya and I'm your host. This program is brought to you with support from the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Today we are focusing on grand corruption, state capture, and looking at this from the views of a socio-economic justice perspective. The basis of this discussion is a report that was compiled by the Citizenry group, which focused on shell companies, efforts to try and hide assets in overseas tax havens, loopholes in corruption and state procurement, amongst others. Those were findings found in this report by the Citizenry group, and it was focusing on the assets and business operations of an individual. His name is Kudata Gwire, and that report was published some time back, and that forms the basis of our discussion today, where we will not only focus on the report specifically, but look at issues around grand corruption, state capture, what is happening and what can be done to address some of the loopholes that allow these things to happen and prevent them from happening going forward. To help me discuss this and unpack it, I'm joined via Zoom by HStvZim Jekemu. She's a programs officer from Transparency International, alongside Yungong Theophilus Jong. He's the head of programs for AfroDad, African Forum and Network on Debt and Development. It's a Pan-African organization that focuses on issues to do with debt and development. To HStvZim and Yungong, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Farai. Good afternoon, viewers.
Thank you, Farai, and good afternoon to all the viewers.
I'll begin with you, HStvZim. We saw the Citizenry report come out a while back, and I suppose to get our discussion rolling, what I would want to understand from you is there anything wrong with some of the issues that are highlighted in there, specifically issues to do with setting up offshore companies, setting up shell companies, trusts and things like that? Is this not common practice that we see corporates and other business people do to try and preserve their wealth, to try and maximize their wealth and make sure that they are able to minimize their tax obligations, for instance?
Okay, thank you, Farai. I think in this context, you can see that the tax havens were used for guaranteeing secrecy in terms of beneficial ownership, and they do this to any investor who invests in their countries. And this is legally and morally wrong in the face of it. And also you see that resources that are meant.
Okay, as HStvZim comes back online, let me turn to you, Yungong, and thank you once again for joining us. As you know, your counterpart and our other guest, HStvZim, was pointing out there, she seems to suggest that this practice of trying to hide ownership is secretive, it is wrong, it is morally and legally wrong. But again, we often read and hear about it. Is there anything wrong with the company trying to lower their risk exposure by opening shell companies and registering shell companies in tax havens, for instance? Is there anything legally wrong with that?
I'll begin by giving a very straight answer. Yes, there is everything wrong in that. Why? There is everything wrong in that, because every business does not operate in space. Every business operates within a given jurisdiction with specific laws, with specific institutional frameworks that should be respected. Business is not done haphazardly. And if companies do business that in ways that do not respect the laws, in ways that violate the respect, the laws, and bypass the laws for beneficial ownerships, for illicit financial transactions, then everything is wrong in that respect. So I think I have a straight answer to that. It is a yes, as long as if there is any business that does not respect.
Yeah, why does it continue to happen then?
Yes, this is a very important question. We know these things, but why do they continue to happen? And I think it comes to the issues on the politics, the revolving door around politics and business, and the power play where some of the key stakeholders, economic, powerful, or the interest supersedes the common interest. And this persists because those who hold power and those who hold the most economic power and the political power, there is this revolving door that, creates instances of corruption. And then year in, year out, we have governments that sometimes are really complicit, not like entire governments, but you have people in government who perpetrate these systems because they tend to benefit from, illicit transactions. You also have companies that are very powerful and they can always have their way through, government institutions to have this system going on. And I think what we at Aphrodite and at civil society are doing is to ensure that we are able to get to the root of these issues and have them addressed so that companies can do business according to laid down institutional frameworks, so that companies should do business according to stipulated laws within the various jurisdictions where they operate.
Indeed. Thank you so much for that. Fadzai from Transparency International is back online now. Fadzai Jekemu, we seem to have lost you as you were answering that first question. I will come back to that, but if you just heard there, our colleague from Aphrodite pointing out that, this is happening because of, the lack of political will. There's this revolving door that enables this to continue happening. A question I want to put to you, specifically when we see at what was highlighted in that Century report, it relates to an individual and their business interests. How does what is in that report, or what is being alleged in that report, affect the ordinary citizen? Because, the talk that you often hear on the streets is that, those are his businesses. How will it change or impact the life of the common man on the street if, for instance, we go after him or we stop this? What is the impact of what is happening there on citizens?
Okay, thank you once again. I think if you look at the report, it shows how a business person's empire has more than 40 companies, and they're mostly hidden from the public eye. It also shows how this individual uses corporate structures to build and hide wealth, potentially benefiting from the potential government treatment. And then you find that also it entails how non-payment of taxes by a group of politically exposed companies. And this non-payment of taxes undermines the ability for the government to collect revenue, for example. It also undermines developments in its different forms. For example, if you look at the economic development, political development, social, environment, etc. And also these implications are mostly felt by the ordinary citizens, you and I. And if you look at education, for example, recently the schools got opened and the fees skyrocketed, yet in the constitution the government should be able to provide free primary education for all, but that's not possible because it's being done in with the limited resources that we have. So that's basically the implications, the negative implications it has on the ordinary citizen. Just if you look at the health system, it has deteriorated, and it's because of such incidences and such business deals that we end up not getting the full capacity of
Indeed. Let me come back to you very quickly, Ngong. There are often terms that we hear, and I think it's important for purposes of making sure that everyone is on the same page and understands some of these terms. You know, we often hear some of this terminology, things like money laundering, illicit financial flows, amongst others. Perhaps for purposes of making sure that everyone is on the same page and to not take anything for granted, could you briefly explain what these things are and how they can be facilitated by some of the issues that we see being raised in this report?
Thank you, Farai. But before I must proceed, I should indicate to you that there is no generally agreed definition of illicit financial flows. I would say that it's an essentially contested concept. People may tend not to agree on what it is, but in a very simple to understand way, you know, when we talk about illicit financial flows, we are referring, you know, to cross-border transfers, you know, which contravene or which do not respect the business regulations, you know, or the normal regulations that guarantees, you know, the flow of finances within or outside of a country, which means it's done through shady means where people can use, or companies can use practices such as what we call transfer pricing, which means you have subsidiary companies that, you know, trade with each other, and then they buy at very low prices from sister companies, and then in turn sell at higher prices to other companies in the world market. You know, then this makes it a situation where you see the ability of governments to tax to their full capacity is not there. So when we talk about illicit financial flows, capital flight, all these issues, they come under illicit financial flow, the cross-border movement of financial resources in ways that contravene national and international laws, and which, you know, do not give governments the full capacity, you know, to track these transactions and tax them appropriately.
And how is something like state capture defined?
Something like state capture is a situation where, because normally every state is established under a contract between those who are governing and those who are being governed. This is a relationship between two parties. And when you have a situation where those who are governing are not accountable to those who are governed, those who are governed are the ones who hold the power. They have a mandate. I mean, the governing have a mandate from those who are being governed. And when you have a situation where those who govern are not accountable to those who are being governed, means the people, we have a situation where the people no longer have a say or can't really hold those who are in power to account. We have a situation of state capture, and it's not just political, it's also economic, because you have multinationals who are very rich, they have the most money, they can buy over politicians, and then always have their way, the way they want, you know? Mm-hmm. So in these instances, you have a state where the actors who are in power, political and economic and political power, they are not working for those who gave them the mandate, you know? Mm-hmm. They are not working for the common interest, they are working for their own interest, probably to perpetuate their stay in power, probably to have a stronghold of the most productive resources within a specific state. So when we have this kind of system, we are going towards the direction where we can say we are in a state capture.
Okay, let me turn back to HStvZim. Now, how do ordinary citizens who obviously are being prejudiced by these allegations and these actions that are happening, how do they get justice? How do we fight this? What can be done about this?
Okay, I think this discussion became dominant in 2018 when the new government came into place, it also saw a list of companies who were alleged to be laundering money outside Zimbabwe. A list was produced of those companies, and then after the list, there was just silence. That's error number one. So what we think is that the money laundering obviously has got effects on the household level, and also nothing was done about this. So what should be done maybe it requires internal responses, which includes strengthening our own legal processes, for example. And then there's the arm's length rules, which were introduced in 2016 and which guard against unfair business practices. They should be implemented. And then such an act or such acts, they are important and necessary, but they won't be of use if not put into practice. We now have the Money Laundering and Process of Crime Amendment Act. It's in force, but we haven't seen anyone being prosecuted over that. I think prosecution also is important.
Indeed. Let me ask you, I mean, go ahead.
I'm saying if someone is brought to book, and these countries like the Mauritius, the Switzerland, etc., if they have got a voluntary beneficial ownership disclosure, these countries, they don't want automatic change of information because for them it's an investment in their country. And if you look at the Mbeki report on the IFFs in Africa, it was saying that for us to curb illicit financial flows, they require internal efforts as well as efforts from other jurisdictions.
Let me stop you there, Father. We need to take a short break. We'll come back. I'd like to pick up. I know, Thea, I know you'd like to say something. We just need to take a short break now. We'll come back and take more of those views after this short break. Okay, welcome back. It is the Rebound series where today we are focusing on grand corruption, state capture, and I suppose the ways in which this can be tackled. I'm joined by two guests. Fadzai Jacob, who is from Transparency International Zimbabwe. Ugong Theophilus Jong is head of programs at the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development. Before we went to the break, Theophilus, you seemed like you really were burning to make a point there. I'll allow you to go ahead and then we'll continue the discussion.
Thank you, Farai. Before we went on break, you were asking how the people can be involved, in dealing with these issues of illicit financial flows. I think the most important thing for us, the starting point is for us to identify the problem and acknowledge its existence. I think that's critical. For instance, you pose the question if the report that we are discussing here, if it's not some witch hunting or it's not targeting some individual. I think the issues, what should be the point of concern here should be the issues. It is not about whose business, but how business is done. I think that is the way to go. Because the issues are bigger than any individual. It is not about a specific individual in the report. It is about how business is done. I think that is a very useful way, start engaging the people in these discussions. We need to first identify the problem, acknowledge its existence before we can get solutions to the problem. If we don't do that, then we will start somewhere in the middle of the way and it won't really serve the purpose.
Very good point there. Fadze, I want to come back to you now. You mentioned 2018 when there was a lot of hype and a lot of noise made around externalizers, and there was a list that was published. Because I was, as a journalist, I was following up on that. I actually spoke to some of the companies that were listed on that list, and they said, look, we have not done nothing wrong. And they seem to suggest that it was some paperwork issues, some documentation that had not been completed or done at the Reserve Bank, but nothing. They were actually not at fault. Does that point to the fact that perhaps our investigative arms are not equipped or knowledgeable to be able to investigate these sort of crimes? It's very sophisticated, I would imagine. So do we have the capacity to investigate and prosecute such crimes?
Okay, thank you. I think this problem of money laundering is quite big, and those who are involved in this are very smart. They know how to clean the money, and when the money then comes, it comes through. For example, I mentioned earlier the charitable organizations, etc. So it's difficult to trace the money, especially without support from the jurisdiction where the money is kept. So I think there's need also for capacity building for investigators as Zimbabwe, because even general corruption related complaints and issues, they're not being investigated to the end because of the lack of capacity. Now this is a financial crime. So there's a lot which needs to be done. Maybe also getting private investigators, because also this investigator, the whistleblower for this, I think Fori or some, yeah, Fori, investigated this and found this. So I think also it was over a period of time. So we don't need to rush this. But I think we need to take our time and investigate and not alert the alleged criminals, etc., so that they also don't get time to be cleaning their monies, etc. But we don't have the capacity as Zimbabwe as yet. That's why we find that a lot of illicit financial flows are happening, a lot of mineral leakages are happening. People are taking advantage of the weak systems that we have.
Is a report like this a basis, is it strong enough to launch an investigation or to get arrests made?
Yes, of course. What's more important, right, are the contents of the report. If the allegations are verified, then obviously an investigation should be instituted. And more often than not, we focus on the public sector corruption, but we don't look at the private sector also. And this is an example of how the private sector is also getting proceeds of crime in the proceeds of corruption, for example. So for me, I think this is a reason for institutions like the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission to institute investigations.
Theophilus, Fadzai makes a point there that it's very difficult for countries like Zimbabwe, who may not have the resources, to be able to investigate and thoroughly go after, pursue some of these cases without the assistance of the country where that money that wealth is being kept. I remember a few years ago, attending an African Development Bank conference where there was this big push to say, let us appeal to these governments to say, look, if you are sitting or if you are holding funds that have been illicitly moved out of Africa, return those funds. And I know that, we often hear of, former president this and this former president's wealth being repatriated. Is there more that can be done to compel those countries, like Switzerland, for instance, to return that money?
Let me first of all concur with what Fadzai said. Yes, those who perpetrate illicit financial flows, they are very smart. And part of the problem lies within the e-economy today. Everything is electronic, and then you tend to find that it's technologically driven. And sometimes we do not have the capacity to counter, illicit financial flows. And at the level of Zimbabwe and at the level of most African countries, a lot has already been done, through, bilateral cooperation with countries where you have these tax havens, or you have the countries, the recipient countries, of this illicit financial flows. And then we also have multi-stakeholder channels, approaching it through the regional economic communities and at the level of the African Union, and then through the United Nations as well. These are specific and well-established channels where we can, where we can go to have frameworks, that can address issues of illicit financial flows. And then we have civil society organizations that are working as networks. And I must emphasize here that one approach, one thing that we need to do is not working as individual organizations. We should work through networks. At the level of AfroDat, we work through consortiums, we work through what we call the DATs, which means the Debt and Development Civil Society Organizations, in Africa, in Asia, Asia, in Europe, in information to share, useful insights that can help us as civil society, understand the complex, vital contributions that our governments can use, to tackle issues of illicit financial flows. And besides capacity building, I think we need to move towards some form of intellectual revolution where people need to understand illicit financial flows is a big problem, and where we tend to acknowledge that this is a very big issue, because sometimes it's not just about the good economics that we see, but sometimes we need to follow, approaches that are more transformative, and approaches that are more transformative might not be purely economical. Sometimes it requires an intellectual revolution. African person has to identify and stand as like an African perspective, on how to deal with these issues. Because sometimes how we deal with these issues is more northern centric, which means it's how the West tells us to deal with these issues. But I think it's important that African people.
We seem to have lost him temporarily there. He was talking about an intellectual revolution and coming up with homegrown African approaches to tackling some of these, not necessarily following the paths, recommendations or remedies that are suggested by international and development partners. Earlier when you were speaking, Fadza, you did make mention of the fact that we need to plug some loopholes. We need to strengthen our systems to deal with this corruption, with the state capture, with illicit financial flows, amongst others. And you did mention that there is, laws that have been passed recently, and now what needs to be done is prosecution. Now, what is the role that is to be played in ensuring or holding government to account to say, look, investigate this, to hold ZAC to account, to say, investigate this? Is it Parliament? Is it civic society? Who is to push to make sure that the law that is in place is now enforced?
I think besides the report, let's say what the report is saying is true, or maybe like what others are saying, that it's a witch hunt. For us, the issue of witch hunt is neither here nor there. It's about the issues which we raised and its effects on us. And if you look at Zimbabwe, we've got the sufficient laws that we need to investigate this. There are individual entities which are mandated to fight money laundering, but there is no coordination amongst these institutions. I think also the issue of state capture and how political in nature this is, so people tend to be afraid. But I honestly think that if we uphold the rule of law, if we uphold the separation of powers, indeed, Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission can start investigations, even if it wasn't true. If you look at the fact that one person, Fadzai, has got not 5, not 10, not 20, but 40 companies for honesty and fairness, that already has to raise eyebrows.
But that's the point I was making earlier, to say, what's wrong with that? If I have the business acumen, the talent, the skill, the financial resources, what stops me from having as many entities as I want? Is there anything wrong with that?
The issue now is on the havens, evading tax, the money laundering processes, the manipulation of tendering processes. The report is clear on how these were used at the detriment of the country. So that's the wrong part of it. And we feel an investigation should be instituted. I mean, what's more important are the contents of the report. And if the allegations are verified, then obviously an investigation should be instituted.
So that's
not
the
that
point I was
after
making.
the report, CSOs, just the CSOs making noise about it, the government is quiet, all the other relevant institutions are quiet. Maybe they're already instituting investigations, and probably they're doing it in silence so that things are not hidden any further. But we await the report.
Yes, indeed. So the point I was making, the question that I've said was, what do we do? What do citizens do? CSOs, as you quite rightly said, are making noise about it. What as citizens can we do? Do people go to ZAC and say, knock on their door and say, investigate this? What power, if any, do citizens have in this?
Of course, one problem that we have right now is we don't have whistleblower protection. So even if people go in face and say, do this, investigate, launch an investigation, etc. There might not be protection for the whistleblowers, but institutions like Aphrodite, institutions like Transparency International, even ZIMCODD, they are willing to petition the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission to institute an investigation. They're willing to petition the police to institute an investigation and also to provide a report back to the public.
Okay. We need to take another short break here. We'll come back. We'll continue. Theophilus Johane, Head of Programs at Aphrodite, and Fadzai Jekemo from Transparency International Zimbabwe are my guests. It is the Rebound series, and we'll be back very shortly. Welcome back. It is the Rebound series. Today focusing on grand corruption and state capture. We are looking at the Sentry report and its implications on citizens, but also just trying to find out how some of these alleged crimes can be tackled and dealt with. Theophilus Johane, Head of Programs at Aphrodite, is one of my guests. Before we lost you a bit earlier, you were talking about this intellectual revolution, the need for African and homegrown approaches to tackling and dealing with some of these issues. Let me put a question to you, tied to what Fadzai said before we went to the break. She spoke about the need for things like whistleblower protection that may help in terms of assisting and getting people to be more forthcoming with sharing the information they have. Unfortunately, we also have a scenario where whistleblowers, when they do come forward, apart from being threatened, they are also offered more. They may be offered to say, look, what is it that you want? What can we give you for you to keep quiet and keep your mouth shut? So that is also a real challenge, where it may not just be protection that the whistleblower wants from physical or day harm and things like that, but also to make sure that we feel that there's a greater good, that these few dollars are being offered for keeping quiet outdo what the damage that can be done to my country.
It comes back to what I was trying to say
earlier, yes.
Before I went off. Development is the product of a thought process. If we don't have the right thinking in Africa, we will not be able to deal with this problem. And you just highlight paid huge sums to keep silent. In a situation where development works, in a situation where there has been this intellectual revolution that I'm talking about, we will not have instances like the one we're talking about, or even when they come up, they have to begin with an African thinking, a solution. I mean, African thinking that is solution oriented to African problems, because we have Aphrodite, we just held an African conference on death and development, where we laid emphasis on Africa as a rule maker and not Africa as a rule taker. It speaks to this. It speaks to this point. And about engaging the people in this fight, it is critical that the masses are educated, that they are well informed on issues like this, because the kind of these problems can only be put in place. It's just the people who take their responsibilities that can work for the common good.
Indeed.
That is why in our advocacy, the people are a very important, actor, because ultimately when governments fail, it is the people to take their responsibility to bring in the order that can deliver on the expectations, on the social contract that they have with the state. And
That's a
then
very right.
we also mentioned about individuals owning businesses. I don't think there is a problem with an individual owning a chain of businesses. It is more of a problem of how business is done. I think that is where we have to focus our energy. Yes, you can have 10 companies, you can have 30 companies, you can have a chain of companies, but they should respect the laid down laws on how business is supposed to be done. So I think that is where the energy should be channeled. How is these individuals or a group of individuals, how are they doing business in a specific country?
Indeed. Very good point you make there, Yungong, about the people being an actor, a very important actor. Fads, I would like to ask, yes, CSOs are making noise, parliamentarians may make noise, but I think a critical point that has been raised there is to raise awareness and educate the public. And I think that was why earlier I had asked, a definition for definitions of some of these terms, because the ordinary person on the street may look at this Century report and not see anything wrong with what is being alleged or the accusations that are being posed there. In Zimbabwe, in street lingo, people may simply say, this is a witch hunt against Mbinga, someone who's made their money, and people are jealous and just trying to pull him down. So how important is that, and what is being done to educate and raise awareness?
Indeed, we need an empowered citizenry. If we look at the youth of Zimbabwe right now, we tend to mbingarize corruption in your language, like
glorify it. Yes.
Yes, anyone who has got dirty means of getting money, we celebrate them. But when the Century report comes out, it doesn't concern us. So the youth and the women, children, also the men, we should be a people who question these things. And now it's easier because of social media. If we make noise on social media, something is done. For example, a very simple example, the lady from Kenya who was detained at the airport. She simply just made a video on Twitter, and a whole government went to apologize to her. The immigration office, went to apologize to her. That's the power of social media. So we need to look at it in terms of development. We need to look at it in terms of good governance. We look at it in terms of transparency and accountability, as well as integrity. We should use this platform for that. As much as, of course, we are mbingarizing corruption, and of course, we've got our idols who are rich, etc. Some of them, I believe, are used as money launderers. So we should not condone such acts, but we should continue having these discussions, continue making noise on social media. And also, like what Theo said, we can't take a seed from a country like Germany, for example, and grow it in the Zimbabwean soil. No, we need to sit down with the youth. What do they think works? We can't just wake up and build a youth corner for them. What if they want a youth center? For them to participate, what is it that they need from us and from the government? How should we engage them to start having them question more, get an interest in these issues? Because honestly, we are heading towards disaster at this rate and pace. Before we know it, we'll be left with nothing and we'll continue suffering due to underdevelopment.
Thank you so much. Very lastly now, I just want to come back to you, Theophilus. Very lastly now, you obviously are looking at this from a very Pan-African, continental point of view. Are you confident that we are making headway?
Thank you for that. I'll say the results are coming in slowly, and I think we are getting there, because the way Africans used to think about these problems 10 years ago is not the same way they're thinking about these problems today.
Change.
We have illicit financial flows, issues of state capture, and more transformative solutions. Are being discussed every day, and we are beginning to realize that the neoliberal narrative, the neoliberal agenda has not helped African countries move forward. And today people are, raising questions here and there regarding on alternative approaches that can work for the African countries. I think the progress is coming in slowly. although we're really supposed to move faster, but it is better than not making progress at all. I think the African civil society has played a significant role here, in pushing this debate forward, because sometimes those in governments, they don't really have the voice, or they are in a position where they can really speak for the public. And I think the civil society organization are doing an incredible job, and there has been some progress in terms of pushing for more transformative solutions, pushing for a reformed system of, reformed international financial architecture in ways that caters for the development needs of African citizens.
Indeed.
Africans have been the loser, in this entire system, and we are beginning to see, some momentum building towards the direction of, pushing for more, transformative solutions that take into consideration the interests of the African people, solutions that do not leave the interest of the African people on the sidelines, as we have had. So we are at a point where we want to look for alternatives to the neoliberal narrative that has dominated, development work in Africa for a very long time.
On that note, we must end this discussion, but only because we're out of time. Thank you so much, Ngong Theophilus Johane, Head of Programs from AfroDad.
Thank you so much, Farai. It was nice being with you. Thank you, Fadzai.
And thank you so much, Fadzai Jekemushi. She was my other guest. Obviously, she's the Programs Officer from Transparency International Zimbabwe. Thank you so much, Fadzai.
Thank you for having me, Farai. Thank you, Theophilus.
This program has been brought to you with support from the Zimbabwe Coalition on Data and Development. It is the Rebound series. My name is Farai Mwakutia. I'll be back again for another incisive and topical discussion next time, so be sure to join me then. Bye-bye.